In this lesson, we'll cover the best practices for implementing wireless security. As an IT support specialist, you'll be responsible for Wi-Fi configuration and infrastructure. So understanding the security options available for wireless networks is super important to making sure that the best solution is chosen. We already covered the nuts and bolts of the wireless 802.11 protocol and explained how wireless networks work, so we won't rehash that. But we'll take a closer look at the security implementations available to protect wireless networks. Before we jump into the nitty-gritty details of wireless security, take a second and ask yourself this question. What do you think the best security option is for securing a Wi-Fi network? It's okay if you're not sure. Just keep this question in mind as we go over all the options available, along with their benefits and drawbacks. Spoiler alert, there's some pretty technical security stuff coming your way, so put your thinking caps on. The first security protocol introduced for Wi-Fi networks was WEP, or Wired Equivalent Privacy. It was part of the original 802.11 standard introduced back in 1997. WEP was intended to provide privacy on par with a wired network. That means the information passed over the network should be protected from third parties eavesdropping. This was an important consideration when designing the wireless specification. Unlike wired networks, packets could be intercepted by anyone with physical proximity to the access point or client station. Without some form of encryption to protect the packets, wireless traffic would be readable by anyone nearby who wants to listen. WEP was proven to be seriously bad at providing confidentiality or security for wireless networks. It was quickly discounted in 2004 in favor of more secure systems. Even so, we'll cover it here for historical purposes. I want to drive home the point that no one should be using WEP anymore. You never know, you may see seriously outdated systems when working as an IT support specialist, so it's important that you fully understand why WEP is outdated and what you can do instead. WEP used the RC4 symmetric stream cipher for encryption. It used either a 40-bit or 104-bit shared key where the encryption key for individual packets was derived. The actual encryption key for each packet was computed by taking the user-supplied shared key and then joining a 24-bit initialization vector, or IV for short. It's a randomized bit of data to avoid reusing the same encryption key between packets. Since these bits of data are concatenated or joined, a 40-bit shared key scheme uses a 64-bit key for encryption, and the 104-bit scheme uses a 128-bit key. Originally, WEP encryption was limited to 64-bit only because of US export restrictions placed on encryption technologies. Now, once those laws were changed, 128-bit encryption became available for use. The shared key was entered as either 10 hexadecimal characters for 40-bit WEP or 26 hex characters for 104-bit WEP. Each hex character was 4 bits each. The key could also be specified by supplying 5 ASCII characters, or 13, each ASCII character representing 8 bits. But this actually reduces the available key space to only valid ASCII characters instead of all possible hex values. Since this is a component of the actual key, the shared key must be exactly as many characters as appropriate for the encryption scheme. WEP authentication originally supported 2 different modes: open system authentication and shared key authentication. The open system mode didn't require clients to supply credentials. Instead, they were allowed to authenticate and associate with the access point. But the access point would begin communicating with the client, encrypting data frames with the pre-shared WEP key. If the client didn't have the key or had an incorrect key, it wouldn't be able to decrypt the frames coming from the access point, or AP. It also wouldn't be able to communicate back to the AP. Shared key authentication worked by requiring clients to authenticate through a 4-step challenge response process. This basically has the AP asking the client to prove that they have the correct key. Here's how it works. The client sends an authentication request to the AP. The AP replies with a clear text challenge, a bit of randomized data that the client is supposed to encrypt using the shared WEP key. The client replies to the AP with the resulting ciphertext from encrypting this challenge text. The AP verifies this by decrypting the response and checking it against the plain text challenge text. If they match, a positive response is sent back. Does anything jump out at you as potentially insecure in this scheme? We're transmitting both the plain text and the ciphertext in a way that exposes both of these messages to potential eavesdroppers. This opens the possibility for the encryption key to be recovered by the attacker. A general concept in security and encryption is to never send the plain text and ciphertext together so that attackers can't work out the key used for encryption. But WEP's true weakness wasn't related to the authentication schemes. Its use of the RC4 stream cipher and how the IVs were used to generate encryption keys led to WEP's ultimate downfall. The primary purpose of an IV is to introduce more random elements into the encryption key to avoid reusing the same one. When using a stream cipher like RC4, it's super important that an encryption key doesn't get reused. This would allow an attacker to compare two messages encrypted using the same key and recover information. But the encryption key in WEP is just made up of the shared key, which doesn't change frequently. It had 24 bits of randomized data, including the IV, tacked onto the end of it. This results in only a 24-bit pool where unique encryption keys will be pulled from and used. Since the IV is made up of 24 bits of data, the total number of possible values is not very big by modern computing standards. That's only about 17 million possible unique IVs, which means after roughly 5,000 packets, an IV will be reused. When an IV is reused, the encryption key is also reused. It's also important to call out that the IV is transmitted in plaintext. If it were encrypted, the receiver would not be able to decrypt it. This means an attacker just has to keep track of IVs and watch for repeated ones. The actual attack that lets an attacker recover the WEP key relies on weaknesses in some IVs and how the RC4 cipher generates a key stream used for encrypting the data payloads. This lets the attacker reconstruct this key stream using packets encrypted using the weak IVs. The details of the attack are outside what we'll cover in this course, but the full paper detailing the attack is available in the supplementary readings if you want to check it out. You can also take a look at open source tools that demonstrate this attack in action, like AirCrackNG or AirSnort. They can recover a WEP key in a matter of minutes. It's kind of terrifying to think about. So now you've heard the technical reasons why WEP is inherently vulnerable to attacks. In the next video, we'll talk about the solution that replaced WEP. But before we get there, you might be asking yourself why it's important to know WEP, since it's not recommended for use anymore. Well, as an IT support specialist, you might encounter some cases where legacy hardware is still running WEP. It's important to understand the security implications of using this broken security protocol, so you can prioritize upgrading away from WEP. All right, now let's dive into the replacement for WEP in the next video.